Сейчас.
Я могу начать. Я к Марку вопрос. Я смотрю на Марка, и он такой инди-парень, такой индепендент, да, независимый. Так, как все-таки ему доверили снимать такой такой коммерческий, махровый, конкретный проект?
Okay, so you have this very indie vibe about you. How were you trusted with such a commercial project?
I think the question is not about big or small or indie or studio. It's just about how you choose to build a film, and I think I'm always interested first and foremost in the characters. The characters are what give birth to the action. They're what give birth to the romance. They're what give birth to the comedy, and that's something I value. So as far as my sensibilities, I don't know. I just do what I do, and opportunities arise, and it felt like a natural thing, really. I'm a huge fan of Spider-Man, but before that, I'm a huge fan of Peter Parker, and that was just my entree into the project. And I don't know what else to say about that.
У меня вопрос к Рису. Когда Рис приезжал в предыдущий раз, он рассказывал о том, как костюм старого английского джентльмена изменили его пластику. Интересно в связи с этим, как изменила его пластику игра в качестве ящера в фильме «На Человеке-пауке».
So the question is to you, Rhys. Last time when you came to Moscow, you told us about wearing a costume of an old gentleman and the way it changed the way you moved. And so what about this lizard? How did it change the way you moved?
Well, the first, before I even became reptilian, the first kind of challenge was operating with one arm, and I was lucky enough to meet with several guys who had lost their limbs before we started shooting, and what became very apparent was, of course, that it's deeply traumatic, to lose a limb, but also how very quickly these people became adept, almost to the point where they would enjoy the challenge, and almost, the party trick of doing stuff with one hand that generally that other people would use too, So I had to learn to, do a tie with one hand and stuff like that. And I thought the interesting thing with Connors is, we're living in a world now, particularly the world, the Spider-Man universe, where Connors, if he wanted, could choose a prosthetic limb, and prosthetic limbs nowadays are so advanced that you can control the digits of a hand with your microcosmic sort of switches in the stump. But Connors chooses not to have one of these applications because he is at the foothills of something very different. A science that would enable him to regrow an arm. So I found it very interesting that he constantly had his stump on show, almost as a reminder to himself and others of what can be achieved. And of course the lizard, seeing it in the cinema was extraordinary, and seeing in the pits of this beast's pupils, you could still see a human, and when it's you, it's very disturbing, but beautiful. But yeah, I think
I love there's a lot of things, a lot of nuance in Rhys's performance that he would when he was acting on set, and occasionally, or often every time when we had the lizard around, he would be on set performing, and he would tick his head or move his eyes or blink his eyes back, and those are all attributes and characteristics that we incorporate into the performance of the lizard, and it was crucial to have his performance there at the center of it.
Можно мне? Можно? К Марку вопрос. При перезагрузке франчайза Человека-паука на что больше ориентировались стилистики? На нолановских Бэтменов или реалистичность подхода? Или на легкость и юмор марвеловских комиксов экранизаций? Вот вопрос.
here comes the huge Batman thing again. When you were trying to reboot this whole franchise, were you focusing more on this realistic, darker, grittier universe that is created in Nolan's Batman's franchise, or were you going for a more easygoing, funny Marvel universe?
I wasn't trying to recreate any universe in particular. It was just how I saw the Spider-Man character. And when I thought about Spider-Man, like any movie, I tried to think about the protagonist from the ground up. I tried to imagine his life and the major events in his life before I did anything. I thought, well, the first major event in his life is him being abandoned by his parents. And that's something we hadn't seen cinematically. And I was really interested about the emotional consequence of somebody being left behind. And that creates a missing piece. And all of us, you, me, you, we all have a missing piece. And that's trying to fill that void is how we define ourselves. And so that was the beginning of creating the universe, is to find some sort of emotional cue to start it off with. And then if I went back to the comics, and I thought there was this humor and this quippiness about Spider-Man, and I thought that was related to that moment in his life earlier on, because he emerges into the world with a little bit of distrust. You know, he's got a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. And when he goes to Oscorp, he for the first time meets Dr. Connors, and there's a connection there, and his father was a scientist. And that's something that sort of was lacking in the environment around him. Like, he didn't find that in Uncle Ben, didn't find that in Aunt May, but he found that in Kirk Connors. And so all these things, I just wanted to ground those relationships. And as Andrew has said before, like, all the relationships in the movie are based in love in some way, even the villain. And I thought that was an interesting place to start. And to me, I don't know how to. The grounded part of it is just how I view cinema. And I wanted to find actors that were gifted at creating reality and encourage them to be spontaneous and naturalistic, because I feel like the emotional stakes are raised when you do that.
Thank you.
And I got a question for Rhys. You played such different characters in your previous films. In Enemy, that I liked most of all, and in The Road to the Boat That Rocked, and in Harry Potter, such a psycho character. But they're different, but they're always like from another world, I can say. So, and in this particular film, in Spider-Man, this is also a guy who's got problems, I think, in his mind and his attention and what he thinks about people and the world, of course, the monster, I mean. So, how it was for you to play such a character with, I don't know, psycho syndrome or something, that in one hand he's got some kind of science and he wants to help people to make them happy, and in another hand he wants to destroy the world.
Well, exactly. And he only has one hand.
Yeah.
So in the other hand, you know,
But on the other hand,
I think you've answered the question. Yeah, well, I think for any actor, you know, if you're presented with a duality of any kind, it's interesting, and what's the challenge and the rewarding aspect of playing that schizophrenia is mapping out the journey for an audience, is saying, how does this person arrive at this aspect of that person? You know, what is the journey? What's the psychological journey from good to evil? You know, why and how does it manifest itself physically? And I think, you know, The Lizard is a great opportunity and a great example of that. It's very graphic, how this man, descends into his own abyss.
So, and for you, it was how it was. Just can you give some parallels for real life with this character, just to play it?
I mean, when you list the characters I played, if I had a therapist, I'm sure he'd have something to say about it. I don't know. I'm just always drawn to characters like that. You know, I certainly have extremely dark corners. But and I'm lucky enough to be in a profession that allows me to visit those places in a controlled environment. Without having to destroy myself and the people around me that I love.
Rhys was he's a rare kind of actor because in this kind of role you need someone who will, if they don't give themselves wholly, you run a big risk of it not being taken seriously. And I think he gave so much of himself and he would go so deep that everybody, whenever Rhys was on set, everybody was going to have a good day because everybody got like, get quiet behind the monitor and just watch to see what happened because this blossoming madness was a really extraordinary thing to watch, and it's something that's, I think maybe it's from the theater background, I don't know, but there is some commitment to a cause which is really, really difficult, and it's very rare that someone will be that exposed and that committed to a role. And it was for me as a director just exciting. For the first moment we met, Rhys we walked out of the room and I knew it was very simple, very straight that this guy, I've been a fan of his work, like Enduring Love we've talked about it a lot. I just love his performance in that film. But so many of the other films, and he's got such great dimension. But it was a really challenging thing, and I think he pulled it off beautifully.
У меня вопрос к Марку. Новый Человек-паук — это полная перезагрузка истории, но в своих интервью он говорил о деталях, которые нельзя опустить. И что из сюжета имеет для него наибольшее значение, какие детали, то есть особенность истории Человека-паука.
Okay, so this movie does have some specific details that cannot be omitted. What are the most important details for you personally that cannot be omitted from the story?
Well, there's iconic elements of Spider-Man that were important for the audience to understand. He gets bit by a radioactive spider. The Uncle Ben's death is an important part of the mythology. But, I wanted to, even though we're honoring those iconic elements, I wanted to create a different context for those. And it was really about finding that first moment. It was that moment where Peter Parker's parents left him behind. The entire narrative drive from the movie is from that moment. He finds his suitcase, and that sets him on a journey, and that's how he meets Kirk Connors. That's how the villain is created by virtue of this search for his father. He goes out looking for his father and ultimately finds himself, but he does a lot of crazy things happen along the way. But that first moment where he was left behind by his parents, and the emotional consequence and the dramatic consequence, the narrative consequence of that was really crucial.
Okay, I have a question for Rhys. I wanted to ask you, what was the most difficult? Maybe there was any difficult moment for you to play. I don't mean just the makeup and all the stuff, but dramatically. What was the most challenging scene for you?
Just journeying to a place where every human aspect has decayed to the point of disappearing, but you're still alive. I don't know, it's a strange place. Where just to abandon yourself to utter delirium, and through that membrane of delirium, there's a euphoria, which is extraordinary.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mark, what are you doing?